Hello everyone, this is Arn Andersson from Evidence, and in this video we are going to look at 3 crucial but super simple tips that's going to help you create bigger, cleaner, and more powerful orchestrations. So without any further ado, let's just dive right into it and see what we have to work with here. This is kind of the theme or the orchestration we want to end up with in the end. Let's have a listen to it. So there we go. I mean, it's nothing to really write home about, but something I made in a few minutes using these techniques based on just making up this simple little melody and then writing this little orchestration to make it sound good in a very short time. Now, let's go to the beginning here. So I have this same track idea, but this is kind of like how I would probably write it or orchestrate it years back when I really didn't know what I was doing, and how the same kind of direction I hear some beginners work with their ideas as well. So let's just have a listen to that and see what we can do to make it sound better. As you can hear, it sounds kind of messy. It's muddy, it lacks power and clarity, and it's gonna be a monster to mix because you can't really tell what's going on, and it sounds more like a melody drowning in a rainforest of confused string players more than anything else. And this is how most of my music sounded in the beginning, because I had the melodies, I had the chords, but I just randomly kind of assigned different melodies and patterns to different instruments to just try to fill out the blank spaces in my mix to make it sound huge and complex and whatnot. But kind of disastrous results awaited me for a while when I used that approach. So, however, I'm going to teach you how to make it sound way better using these simple techniques. So I'm going to take you through these steps now that are probably going to make your orchestrations and mixing sound up to 10 times better. But keep in mind, these are not only orchestration tips. These are things that you should keep in mind both during the composition, the orchestration, and that ultimately affect your production and mixing stage as well. So they're all very crucial in getting a good final product. So let's get into step 1, which is the following: simplicity. Less is more. This is the first and probably the most common mistake I see people make. They just throw a bunch of layers and instruments and melodic movements into the track in hopes of making it sound huge, complex, and epic, though it usually has the opposite effect. The funny thing is that usually the fewer elements you have, the bigger your track will sound. Let's compare these 2 examples at the same time. Let's listen to this. Alright, so we have that one. Sounds kind of messy, and then let's go over to this one, which is a bit more clean. Alright, so let's look at some chord differences here. I'm just gonna actually simplify this so we can only show the things that have some stuff on them. There we go, that looks a lot more cool. Let's open some string tracks here. Let's open the main melody and maybe a little horn and some piano or whatever. And you can see here, it's just a mess. There's a lot of stuff just being thrown on top of each other, just fighting for space. There's nothing really guiding the listener's attention. And even if I take away the melody, there's not really anything for the ear to latch onto in the background that's catching our attention. It's just a bunch of random notes. That said, every melody here, or every line of the instruments are in the right key, they're following the melodic movements, so it's not like absolutely horrible in terms of what I've been doing. It's just that the combined results of all these things that don't have any focus or attention, they just end up sounding like a mess. Everything is just fighting for space. And it's not really working for me. So the first thing that we want to do is to simplify things. Now let's go over to my little example over here. I'm going to open up a couple of layers. Let's see here. I'm going to take this guy over here, take the little bass man, and yeah, actually let's start with that. Here, on the other hand, you can see these are like the main elements here. everything else is basically just a copy of whatever is going on. Like even if I take the other things, it's not going to change. It's the same. All right, so you can see that I have the root notes of the chord here. This is the main harmony foundation. That's layer 1. Then we got the main melody, which is here played in octaves, but it's all the same melody, and that's like just dancing around here. And then I also have this little counter melody over here, which is the third layer to my mix. But you can see these are clearly defined and separated elements. In addition, as you might have heard, I have this little staccato thing that's going on, which is doing these little triplets following the chords. So all in all, I have 4 rather simple elements going on here instead of a bunch of random ones. You can see that this picture is totally different than the one we get if I'm opening these tracks. This is like a mess where you can't really define any single melody or counter melody and something like that. It's all just one big mess. So the first step I want you to take is to narrow down the musical elements you want to present to the listener, and this will greatly improve the clarity and power of your tracks. And while this might feel a bit counterintuitive at first, if you listen closely to a lot of the big epic scores and trailing music tracks, the music is usually only made up of about like 3 to 4 musical layers. Yet it sounds way more complex. But this is because the 3 or 4 layers have been written and orchestrated skillfully rather than a lot of like layers just arranged in a bad way. So let's just go over here where I've just simply settled on a couple of main elements. Let's just open this little piano track and give it a listen. Alright, this is super fast, but you get the idea. I've been settling on these chords, which is the root notes played here in the piano. I have the main melody, I have the counter melody, and I have this little quick ostinato going on. So here I've been limiting myself to 4 elements, and this is already going to make things sound way better. And the thing is that if you want to make things sound bigger, you're not just going to throw in random things in here. What you should rather focus on is to double down on what's already in here. Alright, so say I just arrange this for strings. We've got the first violins here, second violins playing the melody, we got the violas doing this little staccato, ostinato thing going on, and cellos and basses are doing the root notes of the harmony. Now, if I wanted to make this sound bigger, what I would not do is just to throw in a lot of random things in horns and woodwinds and trombones and whatnot to fill out these spaces. What I would rather do is to double down what's already here. I would put some low brass in these ones. I would maybe take some staccato strings and a synth and double these ostinato things going on here. Maybe I'll add a horn to the main melody, some woodwinds to the high counter melody here together with the strings. And the result is basically what we have right here. So you can hear that these are all the elements that are playing in this, but it already sounds quite a bit better than the mess that we got going here. Alright, so the first thing is limit yourself to 3 to 4 main melodic elements. For example, your melody and counter melody, ostinato and harmony, for example, which is basically what I've done. Now, say that you're understanding the concept of simplicity now, and you've been settling on 3 to 4 themes, and you're hoping that you'll be a successful composer, make a lot of money, and everything will be fine right away. Well, there's still quite a few traps that you might fall into, and we're going to look at one of them now. So say that we take those 4 themes that I showed in a piano track over there, and it still doesn't sound good. Here I have one example where I've been limiting myself to 4 themes, but I've been failing on the second part of this technique, or the second technique I'm going to show you. And it sounds like this. Again, it's not sounding that bad that I would like jump off a bridge after writing it, but it's for sure kind of messy. It's all just blending together into this big soup of strings. It's still not really, catching my attention, and I still feel kind of confused to listen to it. So let's see what's going on here, because I think at this point we actually have the main melody here. As usual, we even got the counter melody going here. Let me see here. And we got this kind of ostinato little harmony thing as we did earlier as well, just in a little bit different, but I'm going to get to exactly why later, but just bear with me for now. And that's it. We still have the same bass note. So we have the main elements, we have the counter melody, we have the melody, and we have this little, movements that create this ostinato effect that's outlining the harmony. Still, kind of sounding messy, like if I take away the main melody here. It's a bit messy, and this is due to what I call a lack of separation. Now, this point is a big one, so take notes. When you have limited yourself to a few main elements, you still need to make sure that these elements are together, making up one cohesive sound, giving each other space and not fighting each other. And this is done through proper separation. In the following example, you'll hear how all the main elements we narrowed things down to in the last example, they're now kind of just blending together into one big mess. And let's just open the MIDI and see what's going on here. I'm going to get the basses, and there we go. All right, so if you really start just digging deep into here, you might find some traces of the main melody we have. And we also can see the counter melody actually doing its thing up here and living a happy life, but down here we got some serious chaos going on. And this is the lack of separation I've been talking about. The layers that we picked out in the last example are now fighting for space. None of them are really sticking out and guiding our attention, but don't worry, this is exactly what you're going to fix right now. These principles are something I talk a lot about in my course, but I'm just going to break down some super crucial basics. Now, you want separation between each element so they can all be heard clearly while filling out each other, making one big soundscape. And this can be done through range, tone color, articulation, and rhythm. Alright, so first of all, we have range. Range is the most logical one. If we just look at this piano example, you can see that all the elements, the counter melody, the bass notes, and the ostinato is separated by range. One is in a different range than the other. And this is the most obvious and most common one. So even if you have like a string theme with a few different things where everything is kind of the same in terms of instrumentation and stuff like that, as long as you just place things in a different range, you're gonna be good to go. So this one is fairly self-explanatory. And that's one of the main problems that we see in this track, because if I open here, you can see that the melody and the counter melody things and everything is not really separated. You can see these ostinatos and the melodies. I don't even know what's going on in here, but these are definitely not separated by range. They're overlapping like crazy. So this is like the first thing that I would look at. Try to spread out things by range. But if you cannot, which you, like in a lot of cases you cannot because you're using a lot of instruments and you have to, use different instruments or different elements overlapping the same range, then we go over to the other kind of parameters or tools that we have to work with to create separation. So next one is rhythm. Something with super fast movements will stick out from something that's playing over something, sustained, even if they're playing in the same range. This means that you can sometimes safely pick ostinatos over chords, even if they are overlapping in range, or over a melody that's in the same range as a quick ostinato. So let's quickly look at that here. But here we have this little string ostinato going on. I'm going to put in the bass chords, the main melody, and these counter melodies. All right, so let's look at that. Everything here is, first of all, separated pretty well by range. You have the bass down here. We have the melody in octaves taking up this space, and then we have the counter melody on top, just doing its thing and having a great time. Now, what you can see is that these little ostinato movements going on in the staccato strings are overlapping the same range as the main melody. But the thing that's kind of saving my skin here is that these are quick rhythmical movements compared to the slow ones in the melody. So I have been achieving some kind of separation through rhythm. But that's not only going on here. If you look at the counter melody, you can see that the melody is resting while the counter melody is moving and the other way around. So the attention in the melody part of things is kind of, jumping between the melody, the counter melody, down to the melody, to the counter melody again, and so on. So not only do we have like short or quick versus long, slow rhythm movements here, we also got, activity versus inactivity and the kind of call and response game that you see these people are doing right here. Let's have a listen. So rhythm is a really important one that's gonna help you a lot if you're trying to achieve separation in elements like this. So that's an important one to keep in mind. Next, we have articulation. So again, if your melody is in long legato notes, your staccato ostinato will be also separated due to the different articulation, which is, also linked to the rhythm in this case. And in another example, if you have pizzicato notes, it will sound separated from sustained notes on strings, for example, because it's a different articulation. It creates a sense of, separation between those two elements. Now, if we just dive into our example right here, you can also see that those harmonic ostinato movements that we got going here, not only are they overlapping by both range and rhythm with the melody, like you can't really tell the difference here. If you had the rhythm clearly stick out in the background, like it was in the other example here, then it would be a more easy fix. But here I can't even find where the melody is. And not only is it overlapping by range, but you can see the rhythm is the same, but also the articulation. It's all legato strings. So since there's no difference in any of those, we're gonna get this kind of mushy soup of the strings that are fighting for space and nothing is really sticking out and grabbing our attention. So articulation is also a fairly important one, and that's why I personally went for, quick staccato strings in this example rather than something else for the ostinato to create a better sense of separation between all the elements. Now the final one we have is tone color. And this means that elements of different tone color will also sound separated. So if you have a sustained string chord progression with a melody in the same range and same rhythm, it might blend together a bit and not sound too well structured. And this is basically, in a nutshell, the problem we have over here. Now, keep in mind these are all strings. I only use strings for this example just to kind of get across these points, because it's all a very similar tone color. Now, if I gave some parts to an oboe which is different in tone color than the strings, or maybe a French horn or a trombone, you likely achieve a more pleasant result because the tone color alone, the shift in the tonal character, is going to give you a totally different and more pleasant result. So now you can see how using a combination of the above techniques or parameters can help you achieve separation between your elements. And let's just kind of go back to my little mock-up here and see how I've been doing this in the big picture. All right, so we have actually a couple of examples here, like a couple of variations of the same theme. So let's just look at both of them. Basses down here, obviously separated by range. I mean, they're alone, just ruling the low end, having a good time. And then above that, we have the main melodies in the horns, which is also going to make it stick out a bit more because it's the horns dominating the melodies, which is going to give that a different tone color, make it stick out a little bit more than everything else. We also have some choirs in here, which I'm going to get to soon. But above it, we also have some strings in octaves. And then on top, we have strings plus flutes and oboe, I think, doing the little counter melody movement. So you see that we have the range separation here. We're using like a good little range where everything is separated and well structured. But you can also see the ostinato pattern that's following this melody in a way. It's separated by both by articulation and rhythm. And also by tone color, actually, since we have horns in the melody and not only strings. So there's some good separation going on here, so that's nothing really to worry about. And then the interesting thing is that we also have these choirs, but you can see here that the choirs are literally just following the melody, but also filling in some of the chords in the middle. It's just kind of filling in what's already there in these string chords. So it's not really, making too much of a chaos, because the notes are already there, but you see the things that it's overlapping. It's separated by both rhythm. These are like long sustained notes versus the short ones in the staccato. It's a different tone color, staccato strings versus a choir. And it's also a different kind of articulation. I have the long notes again versus the staccato. So this is all kind of working pretty well together. Now I also have another little example here, which has a slightly different feel. Let's give that a listen. Kind of same story here. Counter melody on top. No, I'm sorry. We don't have a counter melody here. I mean, we have 3 octaves with a melody, which is taking up this entire range. And we have the root notes, and we have the ostinato. So this is ridiculously simple. There's not a lot of things going on here. We're literally just taking that same melody as before, added in this little ostinato thing that's just these quick string runs that I like to write sometimes. And we have the root note. That's everything that's going on here pretty much. Oh, and of course our dear little choir guys down here, which is the same story as before. It's separated through both tone color, articulation, and rhythm, but not range. So to sum up, you can use those 4. You can use 3 of them. You can use 2 of them. You can use like just 1 by placing things super far down or up. And you will get a good sense of separation. So you can see how this is fairly different than the image we get when we open this little thing right here. It's a mess. All right, so I hope that makes sense. Now let's move on to something a bit different. So say that you're understanding separation now. You've been settling on like 3 to 4 main melodic elements, but there are still some traps that you can fall into. Let's look at the next one here. And this one is about the chord voicing. All right, so when you are voicing a chord. Let me actually just get one of my horn patches here to kind of show you what I mean. So, I mean, the basic chord voicing 101 is to have an open spacing in the low end and then a tighter spacing in the high end. If not, you're gonna get a muddy little result. Let's take like these horns and play a low C major triad. You know, it sounds kind of muddy. You might get some cool, like very ominous effects and stuff out of it, but in general, that's not how you want to voice your chords when you want to create a clear, massive orchestration. In the other end, if I space things out with an octave in the bottom here, and then add some tighter spacing in the high end, you get a much more clear, piercing, balanced, and powerful voicing. Now, this is stuff that I guess most of you already know, but the thing is that not only do you need to pay attention to this in your individual chord voicings, but I think you should also kind of keep this in mind in the big picture of your entire orchestral arrangement. Let me show you what I mean. Let's take this little thing here, open up these different tracks, and see how the voicing of this theme is. All right. I'm not going to say anything, I'm just going to play it, and then you can kind of make up your mind about what's going on here. Alright, it doesn't sound extremely bad, but it's not very good either. It's close to getting somewhere, but we have some fairly serious problems going on. And this is basically to do with the chord voicing, because now I've still limited myself to 4 melodic motifs. I've still used the same ones. I've even created some separation. You see, it's still the same kind of story going on here. Things are separated by rhythm, a little bit by range. It's not too bad, but the problem is that things are very dense in the low end, and then very spacious in the high end, which is kind of the opposite of what we want if we want to create a balanced, powerful orchestration. Now, I mean, you can create some really cool, like low, Inception-ish, ominous textures, but the same principles will certainly apply there too. So, what we want to do is to create something that's a bit more open. We want the bass to rule their little kingdom down here. Then we want maybe the little ostinato you got going doing its thing over here, and then maybe the melody on top of that, for example. So, this is sounding a bit muddy. And to me, it sounds just a little bit out of balance. You know, it's something doesn't sound right. It doesn't feel grounded. Sounds a bit more balanced and clear. Let's just reference them a bit. Now, before I show you, just guess what the voicing sounds like in general if I open all these things. If you guessed open in the bottom and closed at the top, you were absolutely right. You can see here that I got this bass thing going on down here. Actually, I think I got more of that. Let me just make sure I have it. Here we go. All right, so at the low end, you see we have got basses for like a couple of octaves just doing their thing. There's nothing else taking away the attention from that in the low end. So you got a very open spacing here in octaves only, just really establishing the root notes of the key. And these low notes are going to have a lot of overtones that are going to take up a lot of this space. So the less dense you make it down here, the more clear and powerful and more cutting through everything is going to be. Next, it's getting a little bit more dense and dense the higher we go. And that's kind of the way we want things to be. We want things to be open in the low end and that get more dense the higher up you go. And that's what's kind of giving this a more balanced sound. compared to the other one. Because if not, you're likely to end up with a muddy, unclear result that's going to be a nightmare to mix. You're not going to get the low end to cut through. You're going to have some really nasty, like, low mids too, that you try to EQ out, but you're losing all your power. Everything sounds weak. It sounds still muddy. You don't know what to do. It's usually not your mixing problem. It's usually an orchestration issue that you need to address directly within your orchestration work. So now, if we spread things out and make sure that things are not too crowded in the low end, things will sound way better. Not only will we be able to make the actual bass and low end punch through in the mix, but we will end up with something that's much more clean, easy to mix, and a lot more balanced. So those are the core of the 3 steps I want you to take. First of all, just narrow down your melodic ideas so you don't have a lot of stuff just fighting for attention like this. And you want to make sure that there are separation between the different elements. So you can hear every element clearly, and then again, you want to make sure that the voicing is structured in a way so the low end is open and the higher end is more closed. And this should leave you with something that's sounding a little bit more like this. Alright, so we're starting to get those principles now. As a little bonus, I just want to talk about some other nice little advantages that you get when you're starting to approach things in this way in terms of narrowing things down and focusing on simplicity. What's usually going to happen is that you're going to start making fewer but like more well-crafted elements that you can kind of recycle into creating maybe an intro, maybe a secondary section, a bridge, and so on. Because when you settle on a few key elements that work very well together, there's a lot of stuff that you can do rather than when you just like throw a bunch of things in there and there's no real characteristic elements. So here, I just like took the piano chords here, added the same quick string runs from this example and some string chords, and we have this totally different theme based on the same motifs or the same elements. Let's have a listen. Alright, so that's a little example there where I just literally just copied some stuff from the other sections and made it like a smaller, more intimate, slightly electronic theme. Alright, boys and girls, that's it for this video. I hope it's been helpful, and I hope that you can apply these things to your tracks with great results. Now, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me either here in the comments or at arn@evident.com. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you found these things helpful and you want to dive deeper into both composing melodies and counter melodies and ostinatos, orchestrating and structuring your tracks using virtual instruments and sample libraries, as well as producing and mixing your own cinematic tracks, you might want to check out my course called Cinematic Music from ID to Finish Recording, which is available on Evident. It's going to take you through basically my entire process of going from having no idea, staring at a blank piece of paper until I export my finished track after mixing and mastering it in the end. Either way, I hope you have learned something today. I hope this has been helpful, and if you enjoyed it, feel free to subscribe and like this video, and I'll see you guys another week. Cheers everyone, and take care.